right. Well, good morning, everyone, again. Thank you for joining our 2025 Barriers to Prosperity Data webinar. I'm May Whiting. I am the Data and Research Director here at Alabama Possible, and we're excited to be with you this morning to discuss some of the findings from our annual data project. We'll also highlight some data tools that you can leverage, like our interactive dashboard and our discussion guides. And then we're really excited to have a conversation with two panelists who work in different contexts within our state. They're going to share how they use data in their respective roles and within their communities. So thank you again for joining us today. Before we begin, I would like to go over a few housekeeping notes. This webinar will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel, which can be found at youtube.com/Alabama Possible. And then throughout today's webinar, you can submit questions using the Zoom chat feature. We aim to address all questions towards the end of today's session. All right, so if you would like to stay up to date on everything that's going on with Alabama Possible, you can follow us at Alabama Possible on our social media platforms. We have several exciting projects and events coming up, so we hope you'll stay informed there or through our weekly newsletter. And then many of you are probably familiar with at least one aspect of our work, but if you're new here, we want you to be oriented to everything that Alabama Possible does. So I do want to share a little bit more about our organization and our kind of scope of work before we dive into our data resources today. So, Alabama Possible is a statewide nonprofit organization that was founded over 30 years ago to understand poverty and then to mobilize public policy to address it. And our mission is to break down barriers to prosperity through advocacy, education, and collaboration. And then our scope of work spans post-secondary access, post-secondary success, civic engagement, and advocacy. And I know we had several K through 12 educators register for today's call. So I know a lot of you are familiar with our post-secondary access work. But within post-secondary access, we have our Alabama Goes to College campaign. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, the campaign is one of our primary pieces around post-secondary access. And we provide professional development to high school counselors as well as career coaches. And then we also offer direct support to students and families through our help desk phone line. So supporting them with questions around college admissions, the financial aid process, and things like that. One very exciting development within our post-secondary access work is the Alabama Direct Admission Initiative. So we hope you've had a chance to hear a little bit about it, but I'll just give some quick highlights for you today. So, the Direct Admission Initiative allows Alabama high school seniors to essentially match with colleges that are a good fit just by creating a profile. So, the goal of this initiative was really to simplify and streamline the college admissions process, which can typically be pretty overwhelming for our high school students. And so to date, over 16,000 Alabama students have started a profile, and then close to 180,000 offers of admission have been extended to the students in our state. So all of that was achieved without students having to even complete an application. And we've been really excited about the momentum we've seen over the last several months with that initiative. Of course, after students have an offer of admission in hand, we do want to make sure they understand how to pay for and afford their further education and training. So, a lot of what we do is education around the financial aid application process. So that's a big piece of work that my colleague Ciamara does with our help desk line. So that just gives you a very small glimpse into our post-secondary access piece. Now we'll move on to our post-secondary success work. So this involves a lot of coalition building among our 2-year and our 4-year institutions, as well as their leadership. So annually, we convene our college and university presidents to network and to share their challenges and their successes. And then we also, within our post-secondary success work, we support the Great Eight. So these are Alabama's historically Black community colleges and predominantly Black community colleges. And we're supporting them through a research project that really aims to add to the literature around these very important institutions. Moving on to our civic engagement work. So, this work is meant to engage Alabamians in this conversation around barriers to prosperity. So, that's what we're doing here today. The data project that we're highlighting is really just one component of this because we also regularly facilitate poverty simulations. If you haven't heard of those, these are in-person, interactive experiences that really aim to give its participants a deeper understanding of what it's like to navigate the challenges of poverty. So, one great part about the simulation is that it adds so much context to the numbers that we're going to see on the data sheet today. It gives someone kind of like it allows them to step into the shoes of someone who lives this very real experience of poverty. And then it lets them navigate some of the challenges that we're going to see across the data today. So, all of the work that we do throughout it all, we're advocating for Alabamians to have the opportunity to lead prosperous lives. So, advocacy is a key piece of all of this. So, our barriers to prosperity data. Let's start with a little bit of background information about how the data sheet and its accompanying resources are created every year. So, we utilize national and state data sets, and we report on all different barriers to prosperity. Many of the data sets that we use are coming from the US Census Bureau, and within that, we largely draw on the American Community Survey, its 5-year estimates. We also utilize state data sets, so we draw from the Alabama Department of Human Resources and the Alabama Commission on Higher Education. And then within these data sets, we're pulling several measures to highlight on page 2 of the data sheet. So we're looking at rates of poverty, food security, educational attainment, employment, and then health insurance coverage. And then a goal of ours is to always highlight disparities across different populations and different geographies. So we'll do a little bit of that today. So some of our key findings. This year, Alabama is the 7th poorest state in the country. And according to Census Bureau data, Alabama has more than 780,000 people living below the federal poverty line. And that figure includes 236,000 of Alabama's children. And then the poverty that we see in our state is more concentrated in certain regions. So 10 counties in Alabama have a poverty rate higher than 25%, while only 2 counties in our entire state have a poverty rate under 10%. So now I want to take a moment just to compare Alabama to the rest of the country. So we have seen poverty in our state and around the country decreasing as we kind of recover from the economic impact of the pandemic. So Alabama's poverty rate actually dropped zero point 0.5 percentage points from the previous year. So it went from 16.2% to 15.7%. We, of course, still have a much higher poverty rate than the national rate of 12.5%. Our child poverty rate also dropped zero point 0.5 percentage points. So 21.3% of our children live in poverty, and that's compared to 16% across the nation. And then while our median household income did increase, it still remains around $15,000 less than the national median household income of 700, I mean, sorry, $77,719. So as we can see, despite progress being made across the state, we still are lagging behind the national rates. So let's take a moment to look at some of the disparities across race and ethnicity. So we always look at the three largest racial and ethnic groups in our state. And as you can see, these vary dramatically. Of note, this is actually the first year in the history of our data sheet that the poverty rate for Hispanic or Latino Alabamians is lower than the poverty rate of Black or African American Alabamians. So they do have a lower rate this year, whereas in previous years, this rate has always been higher than that of Black or African Americans. So on the left, you see that 25.1% of Black or African American Alabamians are in poverty, compared to 24.6% of Hispanic or Latino Alabamians, compared to 11.1% of white Alabamians. And then just given the population distribution in Alabama, Black people are overrepresented and disproportionately affected by poverty. So, Black people are about 2.26 times more likely to be experiencing poverty than their white counterparts. Moving on to median household income. So, we see similar things here. Um, Black or African American Alabamians, their median household income is $42,373. For Hispanic or Latino Alabamians, it is $55,791. And then for white Alabamians, it is $71,763. So Hispanic or Latino Alabamians saw the largest year-over-year growth in median household income. And then they also saw the greatest year-over-year decrease in poverty. And potentially one part of that progress for this particular population is that educational attainment for this population is growing at a faster rate than the two other groups. In particular, educational attainment for bachelor's degrees or higher is growing at a faster rate for our Hispanic or Latino population. So our goal with highlighting these differences among the populations is really to know how to support our communities and maybe to consider some of the factors that are playing into the progress we see for some groups, more so than others. So we want to take a look at the actual data sheet and the accompanying resources. So all of these can be found at alabamapossible.org/data sheet. I'll just go ahead and drop that in the chat if it hasn't been put there already. And let me go ahead and stop sharing my slides and I'll pull up our data sheet on the website. So this is all things barriers to prosperity data resources. If you click on the links here, it'll drop you down to each particular section. So this is just a screen grab of the data sheet. If you click on the picture, it will actually open up the data sheet into a separate tab. So let's start off just looking at our data sheet and giving you an overview. So on the first page, you'll see two maps. The goal is to allow us to visualize and compare the poverty rates of different regions. So the darker the shading, the higher the rates of poverty. And then the lighter shading indicates lower rates of poverty. So looking at the state map, I'm going to zoom in to try to give you a better idea. Like I mentioned, we see 10 counties across the state that have a poverty rate of 25% or more. Six of those counties even have poverty rates of 30% or higher. So, close to one-third of the county's residents living below the poverty line. And then if we move over to the other map, we'll see the United States here, and Alabama is one of seven states in the country with a poverty rate greater than or equal to 15.7%. So you can see the darker orange shading indicating that. All of this is determined by our poverty thresholds. So these are our federal measurements. For a single individual, the federal poverty threshold is $15,480. For a family of four, the federal poverty threshold is $31,200. We say this every year, but this way of measuring poverty is extremely limited and does not show the full extent of the financial hardship that people across our nation are facing. I'm sure it's obvious, but you could imagine a world where a family of four earns $32,000 and is above the poverty threshold, but is still very much struggling financially. Nevertheless, the poverty thresholds do give us a way of comparing across our states. We'll scroll down further on the first page of the data sheet. Here we see some charts and graphs. So again, this is looking at the three largest racial and ethnic groups in our state. We see in the bar graphs that the poverty rates and the median household incomes across these groups vary quite widely. And then moving to the right, we can see how things have changed in Alabama and in the rest of the country from 2019 to 2023. So, of course, Alabama has a higher poverty rate than the rest of the country. And then our median household income is still much lower than the national median household income. So the first page of the data sheet is really meant to give this zoomed out overview. When we go down to our second page of the data sheet, we can see data for all 67 counties, the state as a whole, and the United States. And then our measures are broken up into these big categories across the top of page two. So I want to spend a little bit of time on this first section because this first section, poverty rate by demographic, is probably our most commonly misinterpreted section. So I just want to make sure I explain it as clearly as possible. But this section starts out reiterating what we saw on page one. So 15.7% of all Alabamians are in poverty. And then we see a breakdown by race and ethnicity. So, for instance, 25.1% of Black or African American Alabamians are in poverty. And then just to clarify, this is not saying that 25.1% of Alabamians are Black or African American. Rather, it's saying the poverty rate of this group. So we disaggregate by race and ethnicity, by age. We also pull out the poverty rate of female-headed households with children because, as you can see, this rate is always quite alarming and I think signals some policies that we can advocate for to reduce this rate. Further on, we get to poverty rate by educational attainment. So again, we're still in this section of the poverty rate. So all these percentages here are showing you the rates of poverty for this group. So for example, the poverty rate of Alabama individuals 25 or older who did not graduate high school is 28.7%. So, to risk being redundant, another way of saying that is that 28.7% of Alabama individuals who are 25 or older and did not graduate high school are in poverty. And you'll notice that the poverty rate decreases as educational attainment increases. For instance, in this last column, you'll see 4.7% of Alabama individuals 25 or older who have a bachelor's degree or higher are in poverty. And again, I just want to clarify this because it is something that we see misquoted or misrepresented in news articles. This is not saying that only 4.7% of Alabamians have a bachelor's degree or higher. Rather, it's saying of the Alabamians who have a bachelor's degree or higher, only 4.7% of them are in poverty. All right, let's move on to the next section, food security. So here we see rates of food insecurity for the overall population as well as for children. And this is reported by Feeding America. We also see the rates of recipients of SNAP benefits or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. I want to make a note that this could be the last year we're able to include this particular food insecurity data. So the current administration has terminated the food insecurity survey that Feeding America relies on to produce their annual report. So we will be monitoring alternative data sets that could replace this. We do know that national organizations are trying to fill in the gap here. But we know that this particular data set will not be available in future years. Next, we move on to education measures. So we see the percentage of individuals who are 25 or older who are high school graduates or higher compared to those that have bachelor's degrees or higher. And this is broken up by overall and by sex. We also have the college enrollment rates, including both 2-year and 4-year college going rates. And we're very excited to have new data for this section after a few years of missing it. So this is showing the college enrollment for the high school class of 2024. And we do have some exciting news here. So the number and the percentage of recent graduates going to four-year schools are now higher than in any year since AIC has been providing the data. So this, you can see that reflected in the percentage here, this 34% going to a four-year college. And then I also wanted to note something about the 2-year college going rate. So while this percentage has remained fairly steady over the last 4 years, dual enrollment at these 2-year institutions has actually doubled over the last 4 years. So this percentage staying steady rather than growing might be because high school students who are participating in dual enrollment are proceeding directly on to a four-year program, or perhaps are even moving directly into the workforce. So speaking of workforce, let's move on to our employment section. So here we're showing the workforce participation rate of the population 16 and older, as well as the median household income. And then lastly, we show the percentage of individuals who are 19 to 64 who are without health insurance. So this is highlighting how much of a role employment plays in folks having access to health insurance or not. Zoom out of page 2 because I want to go down to the bottom where we have some of our terms defined. And then we also have all of our sources cited. I would encourage you, if you are interested in a particular piece of data, to look at the year of the source. We use all of the most currently available data at the time of publishing the data sheet. All right, so I'm going to go back to our landing page. And you'll see the links up here. If you click onto data dashboard, it will take you to this image where you can click into our public Tableau profile. So this is our interactive dashboard, and you can see that the first tab is poverty by state. So here, if you click on any state on the map, you'll see that it updates to give the overall poverty rate, the child poverty rate, and then median household income. If we click into our second tab, we'll go to poverty by county. So again, clicking any county on the map, you'll be able to see detailed data on all of the measures that are on our data sheet, as well as some additional measures that are not highlighted on our data sheet. So I would recommend using the poverty by county tab if you are interested in just one county and the volume of numbers on the data sheet is a bit overwhelming to you. This kind of lets you focus on a specific county of interest. Going on to our third tab is our county data table. So this is similar to page 2 of the data sheet, although it does have a few additional columns that you can see here. Just want to make a quick note, if you see anything blank in a column, that's because that particular population might not be represented within that county. So here you're able to deselect all, and then you can select any county of interest. I know we got a few comments on our registration form that people were interested in certain regions of the state. So this tab would be a great way to pull specific counties that are within a region and only look at those. So you can manipulate this a bit. So if you would like to sort by any column, you can click that column and you can sort in ascending or descending order. So this just lets you kind of filter through what you want to see. Going back to our landing page, scroll up to the top. So if you click under additional resources, you'll be taken to our two different discussion guides. And I'm going to open up our educator's guide first. So the purpose of this guide is to incorporate the data sheet and our dashboard into activities that are in a classroom setting. It is primarily meant for a secondary or post-secondary level classroom. So you give some context to the resources before we get into our discussion questions. So these discussion questions have been drafted to get students thinking about how all the data they're seeing translates into real world living conditions within the counties in our state. And an important part of that reflection is getting students to consider the impact of systems and institutions and even policies on their community. So we have all of our discussion questions, and then we have an assignment that you can use, the community assessment worksheet. So this gets students to look specifically at the data for their home community. So they'll describe what they're seeing. Um, they'll list some of the data for their home community, and then it also prompts them to kind of think about this more deeply and how they can translate what they're seeing into some kind of action outside of the class or even in their future professional life. And then lastly, as a way of just developing the way that students are thinking about and communicating about poverty, we have an infographic assignment that allows students to create a visual representation of their understanding of this. So that is our educator guide. We also have an abbreviated version of this guide that is really meant for any context, so not just the classroom. So this two-page guide is just one more way of encouraging people to consider the data within the context of their own community and critically reflect on what they see. Going back to our landing page, if you are interested in seeing previous versions of our data sheets, you're able to click archived resources. And then when you open this up, we have all of our previous iterations of the data sheet. I know a lot of y'all hold on to your hard copies, but if you ever lose one of those, feel free to visit our website and come back to these versions. So I know I covered a lot. I would now like to transition into our panel discussion. So we're happy to have two panelists with us today to talk more about what data looks like in their respective fields. So I'm going to introduce each of them, and then we have some questions for them already prepared, but please feel free if you have any questions along the way, drop those into the chat. We'll aim to address those after they've had an opportunity to discuss. So I'm going to start off with Adam Mullendorf. So Adam Mullendorf founded Longleaf Strategies in 2013. Longleaf Strategies collaborates with its clients to shape public policy through bold, memorable messaging campaigns. At Longleaf Strategies, Adam has spearheaded communication initiatives that have led to significant wins for Alabama students. Adam helps people and organizations get their ideas covered in the news, keep partners and affiliate groups informed about their work, and build their influence. So, Adam, we're happy to have you with us today, and I would love to start off by asking, in your work in public affairs, we know you've utilized our data sheet as well as other data reports as
Mhm.
just one tool in your tool belt when you're guiding organizations in their advocacy. So I was wondering if you could speak to the way that Longleaf Strategies employs data
Mhm.
alongside a number of other tools, I'm sure, to really garner support around a particular issue.
Sure. And thank you, May, and thank you, Chandra, for giving me the opportunity to join y'all today. And hello, everyone. Happy holidays. Yes, so the Alabama Possible data sheet is one of a handful of products that has a permanent spot on my desk. And I know it is a product that if you go into many policymakers inside some of the state agencies that exist, you will see it on their desk, on their walls, etc. A lot of what I do for my clients and the groups that I work with is helping them create purposeful and intentional persuasive communications content that can help make a complicated subject or just a subject easier to understand. And this data sheet as well as some other products makes it so simple because even when you go into the different dashboards and other things, you're able to see how the different data correlates with one another. You're able to sit there and go and make intentional content for the lawmaker or for the group that you are speaking to so that it's not just someone else's problem. Oftentimes in our kind of conversations, when we start talking about the statewide impact, this number of people statewide that are in poverty, it may it's easy to dismiss by some lawmakers because they may be thinking about their particular community, their particular circle of influence. And so when you have a product like the data sheet that breaks it down by county, that helps you go, well, it may not necessarily be the poverty rate that's the issue, but how is that correlating with your graduation rate, with your college admissions rate, with your college going rate, the number of people with a bachelor's degree, etc. It really allows you to have a conversation with them about the topic that you're having that is grounded in what's important to them. Because as I often say, a lot of times it's not what you say that matters, it's what your audience hears that matters. And the data sheet gives you the tools in which you can ground that conversation in what's important to them so that they are hearing what it is that you need them to hear in order to take the action or the initiative that you want them to take, whether it be a lawmaker trying to for or against a certain policy, an official inside the state agency that's trying to develop a policy to be impactful, or even just the Kiwanis Club, the Rotary Club, other groups that you're speaking to as you're trying to build momentum towards whatever goal you're working towards.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, the feedback we receive regarding the data sheet is that the disaggregation and it has developed year over year in the around 15 years that we've been doing this. But as we continue to disaggregate more and more, I think things jump out or things are more poignant because you are kind of narrowing down and drilling
Mhm.
down to see the effect on a particular community. So thank you for highlighting that. And we really are interested in your perspective, just given the advocacy that you have done on the state level with
Mhm.
your organization. So given that a lot of our work is within the realm of education, I mean, on the
Mhm.
post-secondary side, but within all aspects, we would love to know, since you've worked with education organizations to advocate
Mhm.
at the state level, could you give us a specific example of partnering with an education agency and then how y'all were able to use data to collaborate and then
Mhm.
advocate for change within the legislature?
Sure. So the two best examples that I love to share. Um, One is when we were looking at working with the Alabama Department of Early Childhood Education, and I was specifically working with a group called the Alabama School Readiness Alliance, which was a partnership of several organizations looking to expand and make the case for why we need to invest in early childhood education and high quality early childhood education. And so when we were working with the data sheet in particular, it allowed us to draw that correlation almost from cradle to career of the importance of early childhood education and how we are able to um, show some of the lagging indicators that can be improved. Because what we knew is that from other research is that individuals that attended a high quality pre-K program were more likely to be ready for kindergarten. They were more likely to graduate from high school. They were more like less likely to be suspended or have behavioral issues. They're more likely to get a job, etc. And so we were able to then take the disaggregation of the data from the data sheet, go into lawmakers' offices and say, look, here's where your kindergarten readinesses are. Here's where your um, third grade reading scores. Here's where your high school graduation are. Here's where your college going rates are. Here's where your unemployment is. If you invest in pre-K, we know that they're going to outperform their peers and these numbers are going to go up. And then we're able to then demonstrate that over a time period. The second way that we've been able to use the data sheet is in these conversations is for other clients where we'll work a lot from again the idea of creating policies that benefit children and families from cradle to career, meaning that we are improving the well-being and quality and opportunities for children almost prenatally through the time that they are able to enter the workforce. And one of the tools that I love doing is a data walk, in which we will literally be taking some of the items from the data sheet, putting them on pieces of paper around the room, and having groups and organizations walk through the entire room and almost experience, what it is that families are going through and what are some of the issues that we need to be prioritizing as we're working on this cradle to career policy impact strategies. And so that you would see both statewide, nationally, and the county that we're in, how do you compare as you're walking through this kind of minefield of data? And again, being intentional, being purposeful, and persuasive in a way that is grounding the conversation in what we want them to hear and see. Um, and honestly, you're not asking about this, but I think like the education guide, while it may be developed for educators in how to explain and teach this data, it's also a tool that can be helpful to you as you are preparing for conversations with lawmakers, as you're preparing for conversations with officials at the State Department of Education, at the Alabama Department of Public Health, or the Department of Early Childhood Education, or just the Kiwanis Club, because it allows you to the same conversations, questions that we want teachers to be asking of students to help understand this data is the same things that you want to almost prepare yourself, because we want lawmakers to understand that. We want them to recognize that this isn't just a number, this is a person. This isn't someone else's problem. This is a top level view of what life is like in Alabama and what life is like in the county that they represent. And the questions, the data walks, the ability to be able to sit there and work with organizations or state agencies to say, like, look, we really need to focus in this area, that this area needs it more than this area, because Shelby County, the poverty rate is here, but in Wilcox County, the poverty rate is here and the education rate is here. And so that if you're going to be piloting a new program, it may have a greater impact in Wilcox County than it would be in Shelby County. Um, and so those are kind of the ways that we really take this data and try to demonstrate it to lawmakers, to state agencies, to other groups, to have those targeted conversations about what matters to them, so that we can influence the policy and make positive change for the state and hopefully improve these numbers down the road.
Thank you for that, and thank you for highlighting the discussion guides in that way. It almost serves as a method of preparation as you're heading into these conversations. And so,
Mhm.
well, as I was mentioning when I was just quickly highlighting those resources, one of the functions of the discussion questions is to not only prompt deeper reflection, but to really consider also the history that has led to present day. So, considering the legacy of discrimination, considering the systems that have worked against communities and led to the stark disparities that we're seeing in the current moment. So, using that discussion guide, not just in a public way, but as like a way of internal reflection as you're preparing for something, I think is an excellent idea. And our organization has been big proponents for data walks in the past too. So just another tool to, to make data more interactive and then also to think about the people who are behind the numbers, like you said, Adam. So thank you so much for sharing your experience. I would now
Thank
like
you.
to turn it over to Teresa Davidson from Samford University. So, Teresa is a professor of sociology and the program director for the race, ethnicity, and social justice minor at Samford University. She teaches courses on race, inequality, poverty, mass incarceration, and research methods. Her research centers on public opinion and attitudes toward poverty, immigrants and immigration policy, and media representations of Native Americans. She earned her BA in sociology from the University of Arizona, her MA in sociology from Northern Arizona University, and her PhD in sociology from Louisiana State University. I have had the privilege of speaking to one of Teresa's classes, but I wanted to ask you today, as your sociology courses cover these topics around poverty and social inequality in the United States, could you talk a little bit about the ways that you incorporate data into your instruction or how you're using data to really inform your students' understanding of this material?
Sure. Can y'all hear me and everything?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for inviting me and thanks for putting this webinar together. And I'll talk kind of more generally about the use of data in sociology, but also recognizing that I access y'all's data and information all the time in many of the courses that I teach. So sociology is the systematic study of social life and human social behavior, and data is the basis for describing and analyzing everything that we do when it comes to human social behavior. And I always tell my students, sociology is an evidence-based discipline, and we rely on good data. We rely on data that's gathered with care and integrity. If we're going to make a claim about social life, if we're going to make a claim to knowledge, we have to have the data to back it up. So good data is profoundly important. And I'll give you, in the interest of time, I'll give you kind of one example of the way that I use data. In my intro to sociology courses, in the very first week, I start off with something called a sociological awareness quiz that I give the students. It's not graded or anything, it's just kind of for fun and learning. And the questions tackle things like, is the crime rate increasing or decreasing or holding steady? What percent of people in the US live below the poverty line? What percentage of Alabama's children live below the poverty line? Other questions like, do undocumented immigrants commit more or less crime than native born citizens? Those types of questions. And then I get the students in groups and they discuss those questions. We come back together. Sometimes they know the answers. Most of the time, they get most of them wrong. And so we talk about how they came to those answers, what information sources did they use to inform their responses, and then I present the data, usually in some type of visual form, like a chart or a graph. And the students are often surprised that they've gotten so many of the answers wrong, but it opens up the opportunity for discussion about how data can challenge the assumptions and the cultural narratives that are out there. And it brings up the importance of systematic research to produce the findings that are often at odds with that common sense knowledge. And then we discuss why it might be important to have good data about social life rather than assumptions. For example, designing effective public policy, which is what we've been talking about. So that's kind of one of my examples. And, if we had more time, I could give you another one, but if you want to keep moving forward, that's okay too.
No, that's great. And I know you're covering big topics and you have such a short period of time to go through this with students. So I think the fact that you're gauging their understanding at the beginning to see, where their starting point is and where you can bring them along towards the end of the semester is great. I know through my interaction with your class that one of the things that you're covering on your syllabus is kind of like these dimensions of poverty with students, the many different dimensions. I was curious when y'all are exploring the dimensions of poverty, how does that exploration either like expand or challenge students in their idea of poverty? And then have you seen anything come from that exploration? And part of my motivation with this question is just being able to be in your classroom and talk to your students. They seemed, highly motivated to make positive change. So I'm just curious if you could give a few examples of that.
Sure. So, and we really enjoyed having you in our class. One of the things that we spend a good deal of time discussing and then come back to throughout the semester is the measurement of poverty. So we look at, the Orshansky measure, the poverty threshold that was designed in the 1960s. And many students don't even know about that or had no idea about the measurement of poverty or what the poverty line is. So we talk about how that came about, what that measures. And then that leads us into lots of other questions like how do other countries measure poverty? What are the benefits and the disadvantages of the way that we measure poverty, which is very much an absolute measure, at or below a particular income threshold, versus the way other countries might measure it, which is a more of a relative measure where people are, in relation to the average family in their society. We tackle questions like, what do we do with this measure? What does it tell us? What do we use it for example, to determine program eligibility? We tackle some of the shortcomings of the measure, like what are we not capturing with this measure about the experiences of people who endure poverty? And we also consider how might we measure it differently. So we have lots of discussions about what would that look like if we had a different measure? What would we include? Things like social exclusion or access to resources and services. Should we vary that measure by geographical location? So like, when you pulled up the Alabama map, you can see how in different counties, there are different poverty rates and there's, all kinds of different explanations for why that might be. But, when it comes to the poverty threshold, we don't take into account variations in geography and the cost of living and things like that. So we kind of wrestle with a lot of those questions. And this, in terms of what I see, you know, as an outcome, if you will, is that this gets them thinking about poverty as more than just economic disadvantage. It is that, but it's so much more. It's so multifaceted and complex. And they start to consider poverty as a form of exclusion, or a way to otherize, um, the way that poverty stigmatizes people. And they also begin to explore the ways that our social safety net comes up short, particularly in comparison to other wealthy countries. And we talk about that a lot because I think in our society, we kind of suffer from an imagination problem. Like we have sort of a lack of imagination that things could be different or better or, you know, more effective. And so we sort of compare our social safety net to other countries. And many, you know, students haven't even thought about the safety net and don't know what those different programs are because they've been fortunate enough to live without need. Um, so they start to see the necessity of good public policy and how it can be a lifeline for families and communities. And they start to think, you know, because we have a lot of students who are motivated by these concerns and are very compassionate, but I'm trying to move them beyond notions of charity to economic justice, right? So ultimately, I think they start to develop more empathy as their awareness grows, which is always a goal of mine and all of the courses that I teach. And many of them are inspired to work in some type of helping or service occupation. But I think the class helps them solidify, I don't know, a little bit more of what their interests are, or get them a little bit more specific, you know, in terms of what they want to work on. And many of them also get motivated to advocate for broader changes. And ultimately, what I think my course does, what I hope it does, is that it opens up a conversation about how poverty is not a personal flaw or a shortcoming, but it's rather a policy choice. Like it's a decision that we make in this country to allow people to be poor, you know, and that's something that I think they take away with them. And they get a better understanding of the structural forces that contribute to poverty and inequality.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It was definitely evident when I was able to visit, just kind of not only the grasp that they had on the concepts, but kind of the way that it had shaped them across the semester and what they were looking towards. So I see your students as kind of being the future advocates that partner with Adam to go to the state house and make these changes. And I think what you communicated is so beautiful in that a lot of this is an empathy building practice. And what I've appreciated so much about, Chandra and her leadership with Alabama Possible is that a lot of our work that is service oriented is working to address a problem, but then a lot of our work is looking to advocate for policies that are gonna eradicate the problem. So we're not just looking to put a band-aid on this, but we're looking to fundamentally change it. And I think that's the beautiful part of building our empathy and our understanding of these issues is that it's prompting us to make changes on the local level, on the state level, on the federal level. So thank you so much for both of your responses and giving us an insight into what this looks like with the people that you teach and you partner with. We greatly appreciate it. So we do want to have a moment for questions. I know some of the questions in the chat have received responses, but one thing I wanted to touch on was the question about page 2 of the data sheet. So I might actually pull that back up just so that we can look at it. So the question was about the education and the employment and the health insurance measures, if they represent the entire population or just the people in poverty. So real quick, just switching screens. So when we go back to our data sheet, so yes, only this section on page 2 is referring to the poverty rates of these respective demographics. These are looking at the rate of food insecurity for the whole population in Alabama, the rate of college enrollment for, the whole high school population in Alabama. And so, yes, only this first section is looking at the poverty rate. These remaining sections are not just looking at people in poverty. So, thank you so much for that clarifying question. And then all of these resources, we'll make sure to put in our follow-up email, the link to this landing page. And then I know this might be a little confusing. So when you click on the link, it does direct you to the section, but then you do have to actually click on it to then open up the full data sheet. So what you're seeing here is actually just a screen grab of page one. And then what you're seeing here is just an image to click into our public Tableau. So we'll make sure everyone has access to that in the follow-up email. And then, Brad, I will follow up with you to see if there is a particular chart that I can get you connected to. So, thank y'all so much for your feedback about this information and our panelists. We greatly appreciate it. Any other questions that we have, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll follow up directly via email. But I wanted to take a moment before I turn it over to our executive director for closing remarks. I wanted to say we will in the follow-up email also include a link to a survey. We would love to have your input. It does inform the way that we approach not only this webinar, but the way that we think about iterating our data sheet each year, knowing that we might have some changes to the data sets that are available to us. We might understand that other aspects are more important to you than others. So feel free to give us that feedback when we send out a link later in our follow-up email. But I'd now love to turn it over to our executive director for some closing remarks.
Thank you so much, May. So first, I want all of you to join me in using your reaction tool or coming off screen or whatever you have to do. I want us to join in thanking both Teresa and Adam for an amazing discussion and really transparently sharing with us how they use the data sheet and giving us tangible examples of how maybe you can use the data sheet going forward. And also these thank you also go to May for making sure that this data is available and put in ways that is very clear and understanding. And I love something that both of you said, which really mirrors the narrative in which we try to uplift. And one is just remembering that these may look like numbers, but these represent people. We have to humanize the discussion of poverty in Alabama, and across the nation. And then second, Teresa, you said it differently, but it's the same thing that we have to move from deliberation to action, right? So we can't just look at this as, like you said, motives of charity, but we have to figure out what's the action that's going to shift systems that's going to work for all in Alabama. We want to stop touting that we're the seventh and the sixth poorest state in the nation. Like that's the goal. And it's because of people like you who have joined us today. You're helping us work towards that goal by grounding yourselves in data. Who thought data could be fun to have a whole webinar about, right? And so that just tells you that this is a necessary tool for us who are looking to change lives. We have to ground the narrative in a data point and then humanize it. And so again, thank you, Teresa and Adam, for joining us today and giving us your time during the most craziest time of the year, and squeezing us in to share how you use these tools. And so again, all these tools are available on our website, which the link has been put in the chat a couple of times. But like May said, we will definitely be following up and sharing the links for you to be able to gain access. And so with that, I just want to wish everyone an amazing, restful, rejuvenating holiday season. If you're like me, you're already got dates already set for January. But before you start thinking about those January meetings, make sure you take care of yourself. So that way, when you come back, the work that you're grounding yourself in with this data, you can do it at 100%. And so again, thank you all for joining us for our last webinar of the year, and we look forward to seeing you in 2026.